The Conservative leadership race only has a few weeks left in it. Plus, a cabinet shuffle is expected to come tomorrow at Rideau Hall as the Prime Minister and the Governor General are expected to swear in and make some changes to their cabinet. Procurement Minister Philomena Tassi is expected to be shuffled, as reports have suggested. And joining me now to discuss some of those latest developments in the Canadian political scene is Andrew Perez. He's a political commentator. Andrew, thanks so much for making the time. Let's start out with the Conservative leadership race. Only a few days left to go, or a few weeks, you could say, left to go in this Conservative leadership race. What do you make of how the race has developed so far, and what do you ultimately think the Conservative Party needs to do in order to find a leader that can be a credible party leader in the next election?
Well, first, Wyatt, thanks so much for having me back on your show. It's a delight to be here. Regarding your question, so I recently wrote a piece in Policy Options last week on the Conservative Party leadership race, and what I argue is that there's really no question around who will prevail on September 10th. It's quite clear that Pierre Poilievre will be the next leader, and he'll likely win on a first ballot victory. And the party reported this week that about half of the ballots have already been mailed into Ottawa. The party was able to sell 675,000 memberships, which is just unprecedented. It's historic. And to give your listeners or your viewers a sense, in the Conservative leadership race in 2020 that elected Erin O'Toole, there were a total of 275,000 memberships in that race. So more than double that. So that's quite historic. So I think we're going to see a first ballot victory for Pierre Poilievre on September 10th. And then it will really be a question of how is that going to impact the Canadian political spectrum. Whether Justin Trudeau decides to run in the next election or not, that remains to be seen. But what I think, it's going to be important for Mr. Poilievre to attempt, if he's willing to pivot back to the center of this political spectrum where most Canadians are. He's really focused on populism, grievance-based politics, if you will, throughout his campaign, and that's been really effective in signing up hundreds and thousands of members. But in terms of the challenges he'll face in a general election will be quite different. And so we're already seeing in a lot of the videos that he's putting out on YouTube that I'm sure you've seen that he's focusing in on economic bread and butter issues, tax rates and, tax relief for Canadians. And so we're already seeing that Mr. Poilievre and his campaign are trying to focus on economic issues as opposed to relitigating the COVID-19 pandemic and playing politics around COVID-19. So I think that's maybe encouraging, but I think that the party is somewhat divided, and it will be interesting to see whether the supporters of Mr. Charest and Scott Aitchison and even Patrick Brown's supporters, if they'll remain active in the party and whether they'll rally behind Mr. Poilievre's leadership.
There's a conversation that the media and some pundits continue to have, and I've had it with some people on this program before as well, as to if Pierre Poilievre is to win this leadership campaign to become the next leader of the Conservative Party, whether or not he may have to pivot from where he currently is on the spectrum. You just said that you believe he is more of the populist candidate in this leadership race. Do you think that Pierre Poilievre, if he is elected, would have to pivot, anywhere similar to what some pundits may say Erin O'Toole had to do?
It's a great question, Wyatt. I think he will have to some degree, but I think it's a question of degrees because Mr. Poilievre, he has been a member of parliament since 2004. He has extremely strongly held beliefs, and those beliefs have been in the window throughout this 6-month leadership campaign. And he said some pretty radical things. And I don't think there's any way for him to completely reverse several of the positions that he staked out in opposition to COVID-19 mandates, some of the things he said about the World Economic Forum and inflation and Bitcoin, and saying that he would fire the Bank of Canada governor and that he would ban his ministers in his government from attending the World Economic Forum events at the World Economic Forum. And so while he may try to pivot to some degree, I think he, to his credit, genuinely believes in much of what he's been proposing. And so I don't think you'll see him pivot like Aaron O'Toole did. I don't think you'll see a complete change in strategy around the policies that he's putting forward. And so while he may try to soften his message and focus in on those economic bread and butter issues, because we are, as you know, in an affordability crisis, inflation is at a 40-year high. Middle class Canadians are really struggling. And so I do think he will focus in on those issues more. But I don't think he'll be able to completely change his message or his appeal, perhaps like Aaron O'Toole did. So it remains to be seen exactly what will happen, but I'll certainly be watching very closely to hear Mr. Poilievre's message in the media following September 10th.
I do want to ask you too, of course, the federal cabinet shuffle. We're getting reports from various sources, many media outlets are, as it relates to a cabinet shuffle, and the Prime Minister's office did confirm it via his itinerary, that tomorrow at 10 a.m. he will unveil a few changes to his cabinet, but reports suggest that it will be a very small change. Reports are suggesting as well that Philomena Tassi, the procurement minister, will be the main person who will be changing due to family health matters. Do you think that the cabinet shuffle tomorrow will be at all reflective as to where the Trudeau government wants to go? Do you think it's kind of more of just a small cabinet shuffle just to kind of, I guess, help Minister Philomena Tassi deal with some of her family health matters? I mean, should people really read into this cabinet shuffle coming up tomorrow very much?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's going to be from the reports I've read and what I've read on social media. I think it's going to be very minimal. I think we're looking at only 1 to 2 cabinet ministers being impacted. My understanding from what I'm read is that nobody will be exiting the cabinet, and likely there'll be no new members of the cabinet. That is to say, some responsibilities will be moved around to, as you say, support a minister of public services and procurement, Philomena Tassi, who I understand may have some family issues. And so I don't expect there to be any new people introduced in the cabinet or people leaving the cabinet. It will more likely be a change of responsibilities. I've heard some speculation that perhaps Minister Jacek, who is the minister for the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, perhaps her role might be switched with Minister Tassi's role. So there may be a kind of a switch there. That's speculation. And so this is not indicative of any change in direction of government. This cabinet was sworn in less than a year ago, in early November following the last general election. And at that time, it was a major cabinet overhaul. And so I don't expect that. I think these changes will really be tinkering at the edges to reflect someone's personal circumstances, and that they're really not illustrative of any change in direction. I think the government, only 1 year into its mandate, will continue with the same priorities, and it sounds like the Prime Minister is pleased with the current cabinet that he has in place. So I think it will be quite minimal.
Okay, Andrew Perez, political commentator. Thanks so much for your time today, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Wyatt, for your time. Thank you.